So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the new test build of the game. And this is going to be a new custom map as well, which I believe was made by Medaxa, which I think is a first for him, in spite of the fact that we've seen quite a lot of battles with him in it in the past. This is the first time he's turned his hand to building a map like this. And as we advance further through the festive season, this maybe isn't the most festive environment, although there's quite a striking static waterfall there. But this is also going to be an Orcish civil war, which we haven't seen in a little while actually. I don't think, maybe we haven't seen it at all on this new version of the game, but it is going to be between Mordor and I believe it's Isengard. Yes indeed, so 4v4 Mordor, de facto defenders today, and Isengard going to be trying to seize some land from them. So Saruman presumably has managed to acquire the ring and now he's trying to go on the offensive. That is something you can do in the various Third Age campaigns if you are Isengard and have designs of ruling over Middle-earth on your own, of course. So that's going to be the theme that we go with today. Can Mordor wrest control of their most prized possession back as they try to defend what is presumably a pretty central pillar of their homeland, given the environments, although there are White Hand banners already here based on some of those models, which I think are from Battle for Middle-earth 2. Quick note on the map, it's fairly large, it's cavernous in here. Obviously it's another one of those with a roof. I'm sure you've already noticed sometimes the camera does glitch out a little bit as a result of that, but it shouldn't be too bad. And just having a look at things, terrain is going to be interesting. I mean, things can blur together a little bit when the terrain is this colour, so it can be a little bit more tricky perhaps as the attackers to plot your path through it. At least on instinct you're going to have to be a little bit careful. There's a few bridges here and there as well, some pretty nasty choke points that Mordor can take full advantage of, but it's going to be those open spaces that Isengard, any attacker, is going to want to try and blow defensive lines to bits, and the best way to do that is by using wide open spaces. I mean, there is a very wide open space over here, but Mordor will undoubtedly be retreating back to the cliffs over here before they can take any sort of effect. But we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost. Isengard, of course. Interesting to see actually who today is actually going to be the more numerous of the two armies, because Isengard traditionally have more of an emphasis on their mid to upper mid-tier units, whereas Mordor, of course, it's more of a straight split between their low-end and very high-end units. So it remains to be seen who has the greater numbers as a excuse me, as a result of that. Guards of Orthanc here we're starting off with a reasonably strong unit indeed, with an upper tier spear unit, very defensively adept. I mean, both sides do have armor piercing in their locker, which can be used pretty effectively against one another. It's probably more important for Mordor on this occasion, because Isengard's armor values are pretty high and they can back it up as well with decent stats, which many of Mordor's units of course cannot. So the armor piercing will be necessary for them to even the odds a little bit. Isengard have got more options in that regard, however, and armor piercing is one of the things which would be very useful against the Guards of Orthanc, because without it they can last for quite a long time, and they need that long time in order to be able to deal damage of their own. They are also a spear unit, however, so that will help their cause against cavalry, though Isengard in terms of anti-cavalry options, unsurprising given their main rivals usually are Rohan. Unsurprisingly, they do have a lot of anti-cavalry tools, and arguably premier amongst them are the Champions of the White Hand, a fantastic anti-cavalry unit. Getting into melee with other forces, they do huge damage with those Uruk-hai made. Well, they're not really the scimitars, but they're sort of almost an axe slash war pick kind of thing. But Mordor, of course, have got their own options in this regard. Both factions have got kind of the same focuses with regards to their cavalry, but we have seen quite a lot of cavalry on attacking armies of late. The Uruk-hai pikemen are, of course, one area where Isengard do have a really notable advantage over Mordor, and if things get grindy in the late game, it's one area where Isengard really can bully them across the battlefield just a little bit more. And of course, Mordor don't have a pike unit of their own, though they will be the first port of call for any sort of Mordor projectiles that will be heading their way. Mordor not the most well known for being ultra devastating at range en masse, but they do have a few individual units that can be a real problem. The javelins up close, and of course the steel bows that the Temple Guard have, which I'm sure we'll see then when we go through the Mordor roster. Man, my voice is falling apart. Hopefully I can get through at least the intro. But yes, Uruk-hai archers, so they will be returning fire back and forth, but neither of these two factions is really well equipped for that long range skirmishing. Both of them have their real strengths elsewhere, of course. Isengard with their crossbows, which will be a concern, but the Uruk-hai archers will at least contest the long-range game. But Mordor actually do have the edge there. I think the Uruk archers will outperform them. The Trolls of the White Hand, neither side is really going to have a really significant advantage when it comes to Trolls. Though this is another area where Mordor will have the edge. The Uruk-hai do have the Trolls of the White Hand slightly beaten in terms of quality, unless that has changed when I wasn't looking. But yeah, the Trolls will be used in much the same way for both sides. It'll be interesting actually to see when they choose to get committed, because of course as soon as one side commits their Trolls, the temptation for the other side will be to commit their own Trolls in response. But maybe patience is key here. We already mentioned armor piercing, and the Uruk-hai berserkers will be a real problem for a lot of what Mordor have to offer, because these guys will absolutely crush their way through regular Uruks. Though of course they do have a limited shelf life, they're very limited defense, and their non-existent armor means as soon as their hit points are gone, they will start to get whittled down pretty quickly. And ultimately at the very high end, Mordor do have a slight edge when it comes to quality, when it comes to finesse, so they won't be able to absolutely bully their way through everything Mordor have. But even against the likes of Trolls, this is the kind of unit which can be very, very effective with that huge damage that they do have. Speaking of which, Uruk-hai crossbows, all about that damage. Of course, they're easier to deal with if you can get them into melee, but the stopping power that crossbows have is well documented. Mordor are going to have to use their terrain to their advantage to try and really limit the effectiveness of crossbowmen, because time and time again we have seen crossbows be very effective for attackers and make life so difficult for defenders just because of their stopping power. Huge amounts. Adin, by the way, the first Isengard player, before I forget. Nazkai, of course, the big brothers to the Uruk-hai berserkers. Big damage, and they back this up by having armor, by having slightly better stats. So despite the fact they actually maybe don't have the same hit point level as the Uruk-hai berserkers, they at the very least do back it up with more stats, which makes them all round a little bit more of a reliable force. And then over here, Uruk-hai reavers. It makes sense for Isengard to dip into their pretty, well stocked roster of armor piercing units, given the foe that they're up against today. The Uruk-hai reavers may be a basic unit of axemen, but they should do pretty darn well against most of what Mordor have to offer. So I imagine we're going to go through the other armies pretty quickly, because I can't imagine the other attackers have strayed too far from that. There's one notable exception missing from that previous army, but we'll get onto that shortly. Uruk-hai crossbows for the Wound Raider once again, with Trolls of the White Hand at the front. The main notable absentee from Adin's army were these guys, the Uruk-hai infantry, which is surprising given the fact that as an attacking force they are pretty good, because all round they've got good armour, they've got a really nice shield value, but their stats in melee are what set them apart from many other line infantry units of this type, because they are capable of dealing damage as well. And it's something that Mordor really do lack, actually, this sort of upper to mid-tier line infantry unit. Really it's the Uruk infantry, and then after that you're looking at stuff like their higher tier spears and even their bodyguard units before you get into a similar kind of unit, whereas Isengard can have a little bit more all-round quality on the front line, and it will be interesting to see how Mordor deal with that average quality that Isengard do bring to the table in this particular civil war, and plenty of them as well, Uruk-hai infantry. They'll fancy their chances against all of the basic Mordor stuff unless the halberds can get set, but of course the problem that the halberds will have is that once again we're going to be seeing the Uruk-hai pikemen, which I'd be very surprised if any Isengard army had 0 units of pikes to their name, because this is one way in which Mordor will be asked a question at some point or another. You'd have to imagine that their ammunition supply can't account for 4 Isengard armies bringing plentiful pikes, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Mordor can ration their ammunition accordingly. We already mentioned how devastating the Uruk-hai berserkers could be. Time will tell if that proves to be the case. The Nazkai, of course, very, very scary. I mean, in terms of their armor-piercing damage as well. Deadly, though they lack the finesse, like I mentioned, of stuff like the Temple Executioner. Certainly the Nazgul as well, but we'll see. And another unit of Guards of Orthanc as well, defensive, really solid at the centre of things over here. But a higher average quality here from the Wound Raider, but you can also see that his army is smaller than Adin, so that is the trade-off that they have to make. And then over here on the flank for Isengard, starting off with the Warlord Uruk-hai Reavers once again, so dipping into the more basic units of shock infantry, but again just adding more armor piercing to the Isengard ranks, asking the question of Mordor, do they have more to them than their armour? The Guards of Orthanc, once again piling on armour of them, their own of course, made in Orthanc's forges. Trolls of the White Hand, we also have more Uruk high infantry as well on the front line, backed up once again by the Uruk-hai pikemen and the Uruk-hai crossbowmen, the trifecta of the units here, the centre of what Isengard usually do. Pike and shot with the Uruk-hai infantry in and amongst them to add that close range quality. And then just in behind some Uruk-hai archers, 2 units of them just to contest the range game. No berserkers over here, still the Nazkai, but instead of berserkers, it is worth one of the attackers bringing the Isengard ballista, because it just makes sure that Mordor cannot dig into any old position. If they leave themselves exposed, then the Isengard ballista could rip blocks of Mordor infantry apart, and it's one of those things which you really do have to keep an eye on as the defenders. It definitely keeps you honest. And finally, well, there is actually 2 ballistas here. Tommy the Rage Quitter playing as the second Isengard army on this flank. We've got Isengard ballista, we've got Uruk-hai raiders as well. The first example we've seen of them, of course, the more numerous, perhaps more typical Orc infantry unit that you see. Stuff like the Angmar Marauders, Uruk infantry and heavy Goblin infantry fit this mould. Very numerous, not exactly the best all round, obviously, when you compare their leather armour to the plates that their Uruk-hai brethren wear. It's going to stand them in poorer stead going into really grisly encounters, but on this occasion they're going to be facing off against very similar units to themselves, at least partially. So all is not lost for them, but they are here very much for their numbers. Got a gap here, so that's going to be a hidden unit, probably Snaga skirmishers. Nazkai are here once again. We also still have a couple of units of Uruk-hai pikemen, a wise call. Again, Uruk-hai infantry, so Adin being the only one to not bring Uruk-hai infantry en masse like this. Several units of them to ask that question of quality to Mordor as well. Another unit of champions to the right hand, so a lot of these auxiliary high quality units from Tommy. He's gone for the artillery, he's gone for the Nazkai, he's gone for champions of the right hand, trolls. It means that the core of his army is going to be smaller, but it does give him more options, especially in the early game, I think, where Mordor may have been tempted to sally forth if they have cavalry of their own, but I doubt they will now. Indeed, the crossbow line was always waiting for them anyway. More Uruk-hai berserkers, again fairly expensive, but already mentioned how this could be a battle for them to thrive. 2 more units of archers, so plenty of long range over here actually, with 4 units of Uruk-hai archers between the 2 armies. It'll give them enough to put Mordor under long range pressure, as well as of course the mid-range punch that the crossbows offer, those bayonets that they have as well. So let's move on to the defenders then, shall we? The first army from Dabo here will undoubtedly be hustling across to get into defensive shape pretty quickly. Already mentioned how the Uruk archers will likely have the beating of the Uruk-hai archers 1-to-1, but it remains to be seen whether or not that fight will be 1-to-1. They've invested more heavily in their Uruk-hai archers over here, Isengard, than I expected them to. But one thing that certainly isn't in doubt is the Ardenheim shadow bows will be able to deal lots of damage. Among the rangers that the game has to offer as well, the Ardenheim are a bit tougher with that armour that you can see poking through under their cloaks. But yeah, the damage is going to be significant here, and it's exactly the sort of thing. They could be used as the primary pike killers in this game, I think. That could be their most important task. Orc javelins as well. They of course don't have the range nor the overall effectiveness of the Uruk-hai crossbows, but the same sort of problem could be posed to the attackers this time. If the defenders pick the right position to dig into, then Orc javelins can be the sort of thing to rack up huge amounts of efficiency very quickly. Orc fodder, of course, are just going to be there to get in the way more than anything else, but they're so incredibly cheap that you can bring a unit of them, and it just helps to give you those numbers that Mordor are renowned for. A couple of units of Morgul chosen, very similar to the Guards of Orthanc. I think the Guards of Orthanc individually are a little bit higher quality. Morgul chosen are a little bit more numerous, that is the trade-off, but very similar in terms of what they offer. Not huge amounts of damage because they're both spears and subject to the spear malice, but plenty of defensive prowess, and most of that from both comes from their armour, so armour piercing will be effective against both. You've got to bring the Uruk halberds in this sort of situation because they are the best thing for a Mordor army to anchor themselves in place, and you do it for a relatively cheap cost as well. Though when you're going up against a force like Isengard, you have to be aware of the fact that their pikes will outrange you. As much as the armour piercing looks really attractive on paper, on this matchup you have to really pick your engagements wisely in order to get the most out of halberds. They are potentially some of the most efficient units in the game as a result of that armour piercing, but you have to pick the engagement right against this kind of foe. Several units of Uruk infantry, in fact a huge amount of Uruk infantry from Davo here. It looks like 5 units of them, so numbers here Mordor, and again if you're on the defence and you can just clog attacking lanes with this kind of unit indefinitely, it's a lot to work their way through. I mean, the Uruk infantry, individually speaking, will trade relatively poorly with most of what Isengard have. They might have the slightest edge over Uruk-hai raiders, but the armour piercing from stuff like the Reavers, obviously Berserkers, Uruk-hai infantry, all of these things will beat them quite handily in melee. But how many of them there are? It's not going to be a 1-to-1 fight, it's going to be a 2-to-1 fight in some of these cases. Olag-hai here as well to offer that damage spike. We also have the Nazgul and some Temple Executioners with the armour upgrade as well, which is where the general is for Dabo. Of course, the Nazgul, as long as you put them in amongst all of those Uruks, could be absolutely vital, as could the Temple Executioners, to be fair. But I mean, it's all well and good having those numbers, but we'll see if the supporting tools can be used effectively enough to make up for that gap in quality that is very clearly there. We have hidden over here with a Troll Catapult right at the back of the settlement, so I think this is a final stand that's... well, no, actually, there is two ways up. I mean, you can defend over here, but it'll be interesting. I mean, this is right at the back of the settlement, so plenty of routes for the attackers to take. We'll see where the defenders choose to post up. Once again, plenty of Uruk infantry supported by Orc javelins, which could be really key. I mean, ultimately they're such a cheap unit that if you can really ratchet up a good kill count with them, you're gaining so much for your money. There's Orc fodder and Uruk halberds in there again. Lots of numbers here. Orc maulers, cheap armour piercing, kind of the same sort of thing as the Uruk Reavers over on the other side. Going to be vital for Mordor to use their armour piercing where they have it to its fullest, given Isengard's very fine crafted armour, in comparison anyway, I suppose. Uruk infantry, more Morgul chosen, Sauron's will in and amongst the rabble over here as well. Significantly more dangerous perhaps to the Isengard lines. Interesting to see how they get on. We haven't seen a great deal of the Sauron's will in this new version of the game, but we shall see. Uruk chieftains are in and amongst things over here. I mentioned that bodyguard, there is a bodyguard tier sword and board unit for Mordor earlier on, and this is them. Probably the least flashy of all Mordor's bodyguard units, but they're still a force to be reckoned with, and their sort of variety at this level is something Isengard don't have. Uruk infantry, Olag-hai, and that's pretty much it, other than some more Orc maulers on the side over there. Now we move on to T.S. Niehoff, who has also got some Ardenheim shadow bows, as I mentioned. Excellent for dealing with those pikes potentially, as long as they can get them into the right position. We've got some Melkor's Abominations in there, along with another Troll Catapult. I mean, Melkor's Abominations sort of tussle for the crown of, you know, most deadly anti-cavalry cavalry unit with the Champions of the White Hand, or at least that's what it was in the last version of the game. Not so cut and dry perhaps now, but they're still very much the same kind of unit, so it'll be interesting to see how they tangle with one another, if indeed both units get the chance. Temple Guard are in there, the first example of them that we've seen, those steel bows, another armour-piercing tool, and they can be used at long range, of course, so if they position themselves correctly, they can have their pick of the litter, so to speak. Rest, I mean, they've got more Orc fodder back here, plenty of Uruks, Uruk infantry, shadow bows. The Nazgul are undoubtedly in here somewhere as well. The temptation will simply be too great. Maybe 2 units of Temple Guard in there. That would be an interesting thing to go into the red limit on, but we shall see. And finally, last attacker is Medexa himself, the map creator, also bringing Uruk chieftains, also bringing a Troll Catapult. I mean, 3 units of the Troll Catapult. The Isengard Ballista maybe is a little bit more easy to use and less potentially dangerous to your own units, but if the Troll Catapults pay off in those choke points, it's one of the ways in which Mordor can really punish the attackers as they try to move through the settlement. We've got more Uruk infantry, of course, more Ardenheim shadow bows, so plenty of ranged punch here from Medexa's army, especially when you combine that with the armour-piercing archers as well. We've got the Olag-hai, we have the Temple Executioners here without the armour upgrade, which actually, to be fair, in the Temple Executioners case, is one of those rare instances where I think I prefer the unit model when it isn't upgraded, weirdly enough. But they've got their jet black longswords, reminds me of Umbra. We've got several units of Orc fodder as well to pad the numbers out, so going for some high quality at the core, and then having to compromise a little bit perhaps on numbers in comparison to their allies, but I don't think that's too much of a problem here for this Mordor army, because they have that difference and variety in approaches. But we'll see. Like I said, there's going to be a cut in the initial parts of this battle, because there's always a little bit of manoeuvring, especially on these rather large maps, but I will rejoin when the first orc-on-orc violence is occurring. So we begin with the quick-fire landing of some catapult fire from the Mordor side, clearly trying to cripple Isengard's ability to use their ballista as early as possible, which is definitely the right call to make, I think. And is it that? Yes, the Troll Catapult up on the hill over there. Because defending positions like this is going to be very difficult if the Isengard Ballista is allowed to get their claws into the Mordor lines. And of course Isengard do have that extra quality at the heart of their infantry, so as soon as you start on that slippery slope, it may very well be very difficult for Mordor to try and reverse the momentum. But so far, misses all around. On the front side of the settlement here, Isengard also prepping an attack, though things are a little bit more by the books over here. I mean, if they do push forward, they could try and interrupt the Troll Catapult from doing its thing, but I feel like the amount you'd have to commit to dislodge Mordor from this position would be fairly substantial right from the off. They've got plenty of support over here as well. Temple Guard looming. Folk Spear Guard going to make their way forwards first. As with any siege battle like this, there's going to be no getting away from the fact that as the attackers, you're going to have to take a fair amount of punishment as you move forwards. While over here, we do have a bit of trading back and forth between archers. Uruk archers down here, Uruk High archers down there, and you can see just based on the number of losses both sides have taken, the Mordor archers are the ones having the better of this engagement, though that will be the sort of thing that Isengard will have been expecting. Yeah, half-orc spear guard in here. I mean, it is actually the Uruk-hai Reavers that would make for a very nice target for any Mordor archers. Pretty damaging, but also pretty fragile. There's a lot of archers up here as well from Medex's position, so lots of crossfire could be enacted. This is a little bit more separated from the other engagements though as well, just because of that bridge. So it's going to be a little bit more of a battle in a vacuum here between Adin and Modexa. We'll see how that unravels over the course of the battle. Meanwhile, Tommy making his way up onto the high ground. This is another interesting thing. If Tommy can take some good positions over here, could be able to get your crossbows to maybe hit into the side of Hidden's army over there. That would be the sort of thing which, again, we've already mentioned. Crossbows for attackers in a siege can be brutally, brutally effective. Lots of all tanks slowly making their way forward. Still, the catapult's trying to loop its shots, which is all well and good, but so far they haven't actually secured any hits. It's actually the movement of the artillery for once which is saving them. So far the AI has not decided to make it spin on the spot and ruin everything for the Warlord. So it makes its way into an attacking position. Still haven't seen the beginnings of the battle over there though. Meanwhile over here we do have half-orc spear gun. I'm a little bit surprised the Snaga skirmishers moved forward that close to the line. I mean, it is only orc fodder, but still, you want your Snaga to have a little bit of cover. They will retreat in behind the half-orc spear guard. Defeat is a distinct possibility because of the sheer amount of orc fodder that they're now dealing with, and the fact that they themselves are not really in the most organised of formations. Forward come the trolls. I mean, they will rip their way through. Orc fodder, maybe smash is the more apt phrase. Uruk halberds moving in to try and anchor Mordor's fodder in place. It will succeed in that. I mean, the armour piercing is all well and good against the trolls, but the halberd formation will struggle to keep its shape against them, and many of the halberds haven't even got to the forefront of the engagement yet anyway, so the orc fodder will be heavily damaged by the time they do. Units on the way forward as well, Uruk-hai infantry, so starting to step up the pressure a little bit here, Isengard. How much will Mordor be willing to commit to this engagement? Orc javelins also waiting. Meanwhile over here also, Isengard moving forward pretty quickly. Trolls of the White Hand charging into orc fodder over here as well, though the orc fodder here has got the support of Uruk infantry and Olag-hai, the Olag-hai in particular. Of course it'll be an interesting back and forth between those trolls. Meanwhile, more defending artillery getting some really nice hits on the arriving Uruk-hai Reavers. A little bit of support coming in from the archers, so damage flowing back and forth, but certainly Mordor inflicting more of it in these early stages. Uruk-hai archers taking a glancing blow from that artillery as well. Interesting to see regular shot being used universally by Mordor so far in this fight. Balance of forces even for the time being, which is kind of surprising. That will probably change as this goes on. Uruk-hai pikemen being committed fairly early to the front as well. Even more surprising perhaps when you consider the presence of the trolls on the front line. I guess they just want numbers on the front here to put Mordor under that pressure. After all, it is going to come down largely to the support that Mordor are able to give, though over here the artillery, the archers, are now javelins, inflicting an awful lot of punishment onto Isengard, so if it is going to come down to support, maybe Mordor will be just fine. God-9 shadow bows as well represent a level of damage that Isengard can't really match unless they bring their crossbows forwards. Back over here, Isengard going to be having a little bit more luck, but the javelins still moving in, the archers doing their thing as well. Once again, we're going to see troll versus troll as the Uruk-hai wade through the orcs they've arrived in support of. It's kind of a rarity that you see two units of trolls, especially these two, the strongest two the game has to offer, duking it out against one another. What about over here? So up here on the high ground, Isengard are moving forward. Uruk-hai archers getting into place to try and counter skirmish, but this is a lot of archers up here. Archers of higher quality as well, but that's again to be expected. Isengard's archers are only here to try and draw attention as much as possible. Half-orc Spearguard actually retreating from the front now. A willing retreat after not a huge amount of battle. Snaga skirmishers throwing their payload in. I mean, there are Nazgul at the centre of things, which I think is their real target, though most of those javelins are almost certainly going to hit the fodder that the Nazgul are surrounded with. But this is exactly what you want to do with the Nazgul. It doesn't have to be orc fodder, but you want them right in the middle of another unit to make them difficult to single out, even if the enemy do try and target them with javelins, like Tommy is trying to do here. Actually hitting them is going to be a little bit more tricky. I mean, they're getting so close now that, yeah, once again, saw something similar on one of the other fronts. The orc fodder will simply move forward, try to catch the Snaga out. Snaga skirmish is one of the very worst melee combatants in the game, against arguably the very best in the Nazgul, of course, so far. Over here, this is where I think Isengard are most likely to make some gains, although Troll Catapult, I mean, we see they're sliding off the cliff. It probably is worth it though, just because this position could be so deadly. It could be where the domino effect starts if Isengard are able to punch a hole, but with how much is on the front line, point blank catapult fire, trying to do more with less on the front line here, Mordor as well, so the infantry is really just here to hold them in place, and catapult will do its thing. That is of course a sign that they will no longer have the catapult support for this front over here, but this front is the only one that hasn't really gotten underway at all yet. The Warlord now is going to change that, hidden with two angles to have to try and hold. Isengard could try and concentrate themselves on one front line, or they could go both ways. I think I'll probably just send a token force to this one and try and go that way, actually try and give some support to the Womb Raider, give some help to your allies. These two Isengard armies are the closest together in terms of who could potentially support one another. Adin and Tommy are a little bit further away based on the maze-like nature of the settlement. Elsewhere, in come the Guards of Orthanc, though, backed up by the Uruk-hai Reavers, two very different units, one thoroughly defensive, the other entirely offensive. Going up against, again, a very cheap and cheerful Mordor front line of Uruk infantry and orc fodder. Isengard, in terms of melee quality, should have what it takes, but the numbers that Mordor have, Uruk-hai infantry moving in as well. Of course they will be able to deal with orc fodder. Over here the supporting unit is orc maulers, so a bit of armour piercing going the other way, which will help against the Uruk-hai infantry, though more quality will be needed. or at least something, and the Olag High will provide. The Uruk-hai infantry will fare better than some, perhaps, against trolls like this, but they will still struggle. And the Isengard Ballista firing in behind enemy lines. I mean, only grazing hits on the Orc Maulers. I think they are going after the Olag High, actually, or at least that would be the obvious choice of target here. Uruk-hai crossbows immediately getting shot up by the Ardenheim shadow bows. We've mentioned how devastating Uruk-hai crossbowmen can be. Taking away, at the very least, curtailing their DPS is going to be the aim of the game here. Well, over on this side of things, Adin still has plenty of reinforcements over here. They're a little bit far away from the front line. Is it opened up though, are they not? And there's still a few of the trolls of the White Hand, but that's all that remains of this Isengard assault, so he's going to need to send forward reinforcements if he wants to keep it going. So far you'd have to say that this has probably been a bit of a failure of an attack by Isengard, even if the trolls of the White Hand are still keeping it going in a more token sense. Temple Executioners and Olag High together will surely be able to deal with the bloodied remnants of these Isengard trolls. Easy enough, I think. Any support as well. What about over here? I mean, Isengard still sending forward more and more. I mean, the Wound Raider has probably been a little bit more forthcoming in sending forward the entirety of his force, which is dangerous, of course, although you can see here TS has paid the price for putting his artillery near a cliff. The classic medieval two-way. I mean, they may still be able to get some shots off with it, but won't be able to move it from there any longer. More and more moving forward. The trolls, at this point, it's only the Olag High that remain, right in and amongst the pikes as well, so that will be good for dealing damage to them. Interesting concern for the Uruk-hai pikemen. Anchoring this force in place. I mean, the Olag High are a little bit damaged, but you'd imagine they should be able to do a good amount of damage to the trolls as well. I can see the telltale weaponry of the Berserkers, and here they are. I mean, we mentioned the fact that the Berserkers, when they do get committed forward, it's something Mordor will likely struggle with. I mean, there is one of the Nazgul in there as well. I think is that the general model? That is just one of the Nazgul, spread throughout this line as they are, so they're doing the right thing with them. Real hammer and tongs kind of fight this. Whoever wins is going to be heavily, heavily depleted when all is said and done, but victory for Isengard here could allow reinforcements to head this way, support his ally. Isengard look to be utilising their ballista fairly well. Defeat still seems like a certainty. I mean, both sides have their units shaken and thinking about routing at this point in time, just because of the sheer amount of projectiles that both sides are vomiting into this fight. Trolls the White Hand, another coordinated volley of javelin fire there. Uruk-hai infantry getting in and amongst them to interrupt the Orc javelins. I mean, the Melkor's abominations are coming in. If they get a charge, they'll be devastating to the Uruk-hai infantry, but if they just wander into melee, they will be significantly less effective. Further in behind, Uruk chieftains and Uruk infantry on the way forth as well. Melkor's abominations. I mean, things are opening up over here now. There's so much damage being done that there are gaps. I mean, when you're a part of a battle like this and actually identifying where the gaps are and where it's a pile of corpses or where there's actually still active combatants, it's a little bit tricky. TS Nihof's going to try and do so with his abominations, however. And one thing that you have to be a little bit weary of with Isengard is the fact that because they've got pikes in and amongst their roster so heavily, if you do charge in, you need to be prepared to charge right back out again very quickly. Otherwise you will end up taking damage exceptionally fast. Isengard really are pushing forward now though. Ooh, friendly fire from the Isengard ballista. I mean, There's no doubt about the fact that they have really damaged Mordor's defensive position over here now, though. Uruk infantry, the Orc javelins that are in and amongst there have routed as well as a result of that. More hits. Yeah, there's almost certainly going to be enough to rout the Uruk infantry as well, and they can continue. Though Hidden does still have reserves that he can commit. Up here, meanwhile, this gatehouse. This fight also has been one of attrition by the looks of it. The Nazgul at the centre of things. Uruk infantry have been added to the Mordor front line since last we saw it. Uruk-hai raiders and half-orc spearguard. Not exactly the most important units Isengard have, so maybe a little bit more of a slow burn this fight over here. Volleys coming in from the Uruk-hai archers. Snaga skirmishers doing much the same. Some of these arrows are getting buried into the dirt right in front of them, but I mean Isengard, it's understandable why they're trying to maybe piecemeal their attack a little bit more, purely because if you move in a big blob and the Ardenheim Shadowbows have got such a perfect shot into you, the damage they do may not be body piercing anymore, the Rangers, but their base damage is still such that they can devastate an attacking force if you let them. Now Uruk Halberds moving in. So far a well constructed front line from Dabo. It's the long game Tommy's playing, but can Isengard afford to play the long game? Moving over to this side of the settlement. Well, there goes a Mordor general. No, is that an Isengard general? Yeah, Isengard general. Still, this attack over here. And there's some reinforcements still, but I think Adin has probably split his forces too much at this point, heading across the bridge to try and attack into that central area, just try and offer a little bit of support perhaps to his allies who stand a slightly better chance of getting something done. Hidden's Uruk Halberds still holding on the front line. Temple Guard have since been committed. Presumably they've used up all of their supply of armour-piercing projectiles. Mordor's front line's still holding, but more in the way of Isengard pikes, excuse me. Snaga skirmishers still doing their thing. Half-orc Baneguard in behind enemy lines. I'm a little bit surprised the troll catapult were going after the Bane. Well, actually, yeah, they were going after Snaga skirmishers. So the Baneguard here to try and bring the catapult crew down, interrupting the Isengard javelins, which is definitely the right thing to do. The Vanguard will probably bring them down, but trying to stop those javelins from doing their thing as much as possible. It's not huge damage they're doing, but you can see that Isengard are on top in this fight, in spite of the huge amount of damage done to both sides. The Temple Guard are still there, but the presence of the pikes, these berserkers are still a key factor, the javelins. If not for the berserkers and the Nazgûl in here, I would be a little bit worried about Isengard, but Temple Guard and the few remaining trolls still doing their best. Javelin fire coming in from afar as well. Orc javelins. I mean, targeting down the Uruk-hai berserkers is probably the call, and that's why I think the berserkers repositioned themselves so they were a little bit less exposed. Interesting fight this between berserkers and Temple Guard. None of this happens in a vacuum, of course, it rarely ever does. I think Isengard still have the oomph, however, to be able to get through there now, and also Isengard have been making gains over here. So here in the middle of the battle, Isengard have struggled on the right-hand side of the battlefield. But here in the middle, they have made gains. Uruk-hai archers offering their support. Remnants of the Uruk-hai infantry and the trolls of the White Hand in here. Still a fairly healthy unit of Uruk halberds standing in the way. I mean, with how bloodied the trolls of the White Hand are, maybe these halberds can bring them down. That would be a real boon for later on in the battle. They are are starting to drop that armour-piercing damage. Snaga skirmishers from the Warlord moving in, trying to surround the Uruk halberds, reduce their already limited stats when their formation isn't in play. Although I think their formation largely is, to be honest. And perhaps a little bit of a messy end to this engagement for Isengard. Meanwhile, haven't decided to overextend themselves too far by heading up that way yet. Trying to secure their gains and consolidate things, which I think is the right move for the Warlord to make. Meet up with the Wound Raider and then get ready for a march further into the settlement. Across the bridge over here. That little bit of support that was offered from Adin has also not really gone well for him, unfortunately. The Guards of Orthanc marching across, stopped by the Orc fodder, and there must have been some sort of support. Yeah, it must have been Temple Guard, you would imagine. Armour-piercing projectiles doing their grisly work against a unit whose best feature is its armour. Letting the Orc fodder deal with the rest. And now reinforcements on the way to try and deal with things in a more comprehensive manner. And this is interesting because this could end up being a retreat in the long run, going that way to try and meet up with Medexa. If only because Isengard do appear to be mopping up what remains of Mordor over here. Temple Guard strong, but not so strong that they can take on pikes, berserkers, and numerous other Isengard forces all at once. High pikemen moving forward, Orc javelins. I mean, one of these units at least will probably end up being used as a rear guard just to delay Isengard's further advance just that little bit more. Halberd, so yeah, the retreat begins, perhaps consolidating around that citadel over there. Meanwhile, things have definitely heated up a little bit over here in terms of the kind of units that are being committed now. Tommy with Uruk-hai infantry, pikes and trolls, Mordor responding with their own trolls, heavy spears and temple executioners. Both sides peppering one another with javelins and crossbow fire and anything else they can muster as well. So much like the fight between the Wound Raider and T.S. Niehoff on the front, this is kind of what's happening once again over here. Again, Mordor with superior support positions and all of that, but is that going to be enough to make up for Isengard's advantage in terms of upfront quality? Some pretty nasty crossfire coming in from the javelins, mind you. Yaldaheim shadow bows as well. I mean, that sort of damage is going to be difficult for Isengard to reconcile with themselves, and I think so far Mordor will probably be the happier with this particular fight. Crossbowman. Snaga. Limited amounts. So far the announcer seems to fancy the chances of Mordor, and that may be because of slightly more comprehensive wins, or what look to be slightly more comprehensive wins against Adin and Tommy on the de facto flanks, whereas the wins that Isengard have had here in the middle, while clear, have been more costly. Little doubt about that, given the size of the pile of corpses over here, certainly. Snaga skirmishers trying to throw their remaining javelins at the Nazgul, which were left behind. Tommy has got a few units down here as well, maybe sending more reinforcements over here, but berserkers would be useful in his fight against Dabo up in the hills. Pikemen on the way forward as well, so I mean, not his full army. I mean, this is a sign that if he is able to make something happen over here, that he's done so with great efficiency, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he has been stopped dead in his tracks by the Mordor defence up here. Infantry on the way forth. They're clearly now trying to target down the ballista as well, because the ballista is the wild card over here. As much as Mordor have gained a worthy advantage in this fight, Isengard ballista with a couple of well-placed shots, as artillery is wont to do, can turn all of that around in an instant. Player has admitted defeat, which is interesting. Who might that be? Let's add him. It must be one of the Mordor armies, interestingly enough. The Warlord marching forward, the Womb Raider, all of the Isengard armies still active to some extent or another. It may be T.S. Niehoff. Put everything into defending from the front there. I think it expended his entire force by the looks of it, just taking stock. Medexa still has plenty, of course. Yeah, so hidden. So it is TS who has left us. Over yonder, meanwhile. We do have Heroic Infantry still pushing their way through. Yeah, this is the death knell for Isengard up here, so on the two flanks, good victories for Mordor, and I would say better victories than the ones Isengard managed in the centre. Will that be the telling factor in the final battle at the end, when the remnants of both sides try to win the overall battle for their side? Seems certain. Still some trolls in here. I mean, this has been a bit of a hallmark of this battle so far, hasn't it? An Isengard attack faltering almost completely, the trolls being the last ones left alive. I mean, even though the trolls are strong now, surrounded by Temple Executioners and Nazgul and all manner of other units, this is certainly the end of them as they start to fall away. I think this is the only active fight, in quotation marks, that is still on the battlefield. It's a lot of good quality here as well that Mordor can still bring to bear in the late game. We'll see. Tommy, after all, didn't have his entire army up here either, so he does have a little bit more left in the tank, perhaps. And let's not forget, all of the attackers still have an active army to some extent or another, whereas one of the Mordor armies has been completely destroyed. Medexa starts moving back. Trollcat's in a good position here. This is good forward planning. Some of the Isengard forces are going to have to attack via this angle, and the catapult being up here means they can hit into the side/rear of the Isengard force, add in sending forward what remains of his army, crossbows, pikes, so some good useful things left, Snaga skirmishers, another unit of pikes, and the Nazkai, so it's certainly a good little detachment of his army. Isengard, I mean, they're moving backwards, which is an interesting thing. How peculiar. Is this fight still ongoing? It doesn't look like it. Mordor pretty much entirely victorious, still just the trolls. And it is actually Uruk infantry that they're directly facing off against now, so they may be able to get a few more consolatory kills. Indeed, the Uruk infantry, the very depleted units, are actually on the verge of routing in the face of these hammer blows from the trolls. If this unit of Uruk infantry is even going to be able to completely finish these trolls off. 135, I think that is a lot, but they're really not the most damaging unit of line infantry that you're likely to meet. You can see on the minimap as well, Isengard drawing together all that remains of their force. Mordor going to be doing the same as well, surely. Some units going the other way. Heading that way. Yeah, that'll be enough to finish them off. And elsewhere, Uruk infantry on the way back. I mean, there is plenty of positions that Mordor could still take up, but I feel like this probably is the best one remaining to them, mainly because they don't have to worry about a flank. Indeed, they can perhaps be the ones to flank around, which looks like it might be on their minds. And they still fight on. The Olaghai getting involved. 2 Trolls of the White Hand. Nazgul now as well. There's a lot on the way across here actually, so Dabo's army, maybe with a bit of extra support, we'll have to wait and see, is going to be taking the initiative, trying to flank around, and this will surely be making Isengard feel a little bit uncomfortable with that being the final act so far. I think we will have to go up to ×6 speed and rapidly make our way through, because I don't know what Isengard's plan is here. Maybe it's going to be a case of role reversal. Maybe Isengard are going to dig in over here and Mordor are going to try and finish them off. I mean, I will say that if Mordor are able to pull that off, suddenly to switch into being the attackers and still win overall, it is a very complete kind of victory at that point, isn't it? Indeed, Dabo's army is on the way across. Uruk-hai crossbowmen there. Attacking into Uruk-hai crossbowmen is rarely going to be a pleasant experience. Meanwhile, the unmistakable squishing sound of artillery doing its thing. So I can only hit Uruk-hai archers, which is really not the most important unit, but still trying to really twist the knife here in terms of the gains they've already made, Mordor. Deprive Isengard of more of their numbers. Troll catapult crew on the way forwards for Mordor. Trying to go after the Isengard ballista crew. Halberds marching into place as well. Arrows from on high. These crossbow bolts, though. That's the thing. Mordor can't really afford to dawdle for too long in the view of these crossbows. Of course, angle of fire is important for crossbowmen, so they're going to need to try and set themselves up ideally. We are heading now into the final 10,000 frames, more or less, so this will be the final phase of the battle. This middle section has been where the vast majority of the action has taken place. Another artillery strike, this time into the Uruk-hai crossbowman, and another one as well. I have to say, even though it's only regular shot, the increased accuracy has been to Mordor's great benefit thus far. Looping those shots, trying to take away from the DPS that these crossbowmen could offer as much as possible. It's the first full-on miss that catapult has had into these units. Mordor still just readying themselves. I mean, the longer they take, the more opportunity for damage these Uruk-hai crossbows have. Trying to bank their shots, trying to go after the Nazgul. Still 9 of them. Bloodied though they may be, crossbows will be one of the ways in which you can deal with them. They're going to be spared that fate for the moment, so the crossbows have a choice. Do they try and shoot into this force and deal with it, or do they save their ammunition for the Nazgul? Because as soon as the ammunition is gone, you can guarantee that is when the Nazgul will move forward. Isengard shuffling, fidgeting around. Pikes, berserkers, the ballista crew as well. I mean, fairly good and comprehensive front line this. It's going to be difficult for Mordor to try and dislodge them. The trolls, I mean, they may only be troll catapults, but that's still probably the best method for trying to deal with that pike line that Isengard have set up. Troll catapults just using their fists, no weapons available to them. Snarger skirmishers throwing their javelins down as well. Uruk-hai berserkers a little bloodied. Mordor utilising their sheer mass, although halberdiers being a part of a mass push is maybe a little bit of a risky one. And indeed they end up breaking as a result of that into berserkers and the like. It was never really going to work out too well for them if they were going to try that, but it is what it is. Mordor do still have the advantage, so they can afford perhaps a little bit of a mistake or two, but as the defenders you can't take too many liberties with that. Ardenheim shadow bows attempting to get a good angle as well, firing into the side of these Isengard positions. Those crossbows going to be key, and javelins as well. Crossbowmen firing in, and of course they will be attempting to target the Temple Guard. A lot of resources being committed to this side, however. This may be the opportunity for Mordor over here to make the difference. Less of an angle, a little bit more of an easy time for Mordor to get their own support into place. The announcer keeps reiterating that, so the losses Mordor have sustained on the other side at the hands of those crossbows haven't yet bitten. Snarger are routing, another line is required, Baneguard and pikes, but not enough, especially not when the Uruk-hai are on the way forwards as well. That catapult's still in close support as well, continuing to do damage to those Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Another volley of arrows coming in to do a bit of damage. Not a huge amount of kills from those arrows though, the Isengard armour doing its job there. Defeat seems certain. I mean, the Uruk-hai pikes are depleted. They can still anchor the Isengard force in place, and indeed pikes combined with the crossbows, pike and shot, is how Isengard can still turn this around. Another good hit from that catapult there. But it is full-on role reversal here. Isengard now digging themselves in against the previous defenders. Mordor throwing pretty much everything in now, trying to break Isengard underfoot. And the crossbows, how much ammunition they have, of course, is always going to be a factor. Champions of the White Hand getting in behind enemy lines, maybe some cycle charging there. And Tommy will be the key. Uruk-hai pikemen getting into place. I mean, it does look as though Isengard are going to win over on this side. Damage will be dealt by Mordor, however, and the other side will require reinforcements in some shape or form. Still, the Uruk-hai archers offering a little bit of range support. Champions of the White Hand heading off that way. Ardenheim shadow bows getting involved, crossbows now getting involved in melee, everything just being thrown forward from both sides. Victory seems certain. More javelins being thrown. Uruk halberds always going to struggle when it comes to trying to match up against pikes, especially considering all the support. The Uruk-hai, the wild card in here, the damage they can do is going to be pretty damn substantial. Over here, meanwhile, Isengard throwing pretty much everything they have in. One unit of Snarger skirmishers still has a bit of ammunition, as does that Uruk-hai crossbow unit. Another catapult that's slid off the cliff there, you can see in the distance. Ardenheim shadow bow still with ammunition, Temple Guard still with ammunition, so over here certainly the support Mordor have been able to give to of their attack has been significantly higher. Uruk chieftains and Morgul chosen. Going to be difficult to get rid of for Isengard as well. The pikes holding for the time being, but some trolls in behind enemy lines interrupting things. Snarky skirmishers. Crossbows getting involved in melee now as well. The more and more you see that as Mordor, the more and more you're encouraged that you're not going to have to deal with the business end of those bolts. Shadow bows as well, although at least in melee they offer perhaps a little bit more, certainly in terms of keeping this Mordor attack chugging along. And there goes a general, Mordor general as well, so it is over on the other side that things are looking a little bit wild for Mordor. Still fighting. I think they will narrowly lose. I don't think Isengard will have enough in terms of reinforcements to send over to the other side for the White Hand banners to start to be held aloft in Mordor on a more permanent basis, but we'll wait and see. Mordor actually is still keeping this attack going reasonably well, and you've got like the point blank pot shots that the Ardenheim Shadowbows are taking. Every kill is a step in the right direction for Mordor at this point to bring their rebellious allies to heel. There goes an Isengard general, and it is the one over here as well actually. Of course morale is a factor for both of these sides. Generals starting to drop like flies now. Kept most of them alive to the late game in all fairness. None of them killed off early. Yeah, this fight's starting to turn around now, isn't it? It's the presence of the Nazgul, I think, at the centre of this force that has really helped Temple Guard. The trolls just meaning that it's been a bit of a rarity that the Uruk-hai pikemen were able to get set, so I think it's almost certain now that Mordor are going to go on to win this fight. Cleaning up the Isengard positions. Shadowbow's still there as well. And over here, front line looking more and more ragged as it's made up of crossbows and Snaga, Uruk-hai archers. Nothing really of the level of quality that Isengard would need. Still a few of the Nazgûl, and by a few, 3. Look at all the trolls. The troll catapult now coming forward. They definitely played their part. You've been able to see the real difference between the troll catapult and then the armoured trolls that they're fighting alongside as well. They drop pretty quickly, but they're still useful for really making a mess of a front line just because of their sheer size and mass. The fact that they're able to disrupt formations. And they've been very good at doing that against Isengard today. The Uruk-hai pikes done their best, but they haven't really been the stabilising force that Isengard needed them to be throughout this battle. At least nowhere near enough. And now slipping around the side, Temple Guard and Shadowbows. Some of the crossbows turning around to meet the challenge, but I think they will be dealt with in short order. Javelins left alive as well. I mean, there's still technically 3 Uruk-hai crossbows as well, trying to pad their kill counts out as much as possible. Well, over here, things are looking a little bit thin on the ground. I mean, it's mostly Nazgûl. I think maybe the champions of the White Hand got a cycle charge here when we weren't looking, because it has thinned Mordor out over here fairly substantially. Halberds, there may only be 19 of them, but you can see they did a pretty good job there of catching up to the Melkor's abominations in melee. Though they are going to slip right on through, go after the Ardenheim Shadow Bows. I mean, this is good use of the Champions of the White Hand, but perhaps needed to be used slightly earlier. But it is difficult to use cavalry when the enemy is pretty well prepared for them, and Mordor in their defensive positions, they have plenty of spears and halberds, so if you don't charge into them when they're not paying attention, it's going to be very painful, unavoidably so. Get another charge here. You know, cavalry can tip the scales of a fight fairly heavily, but not to the extent I think Isengard are going to need that to happen now. So it says defeat is a distinct possibility. I guess that is the effect that the Nazgul will have on you. There's still a few Temple Executioners in here as well, though not many. That is the Mordor General actually as well. I was wondering, it says Temple Executioner, but of course it's because it's the Orc General. Meanwhile, here come Mordor, victorious on the other side. Still Isengard symbols over here. On the mini-map, but I'm going to finish things off over here now. And I suppose ×2 speed is probably justified at this stage. The Pikes taking on the Nazgul as the rest of the Mordor force arrives. I mean, just taking a look, yeah, 3% the difference. That seems about right, I think, for the way that this fight has gone. Very costly in some places. I don't think any one of the engagements was the same either. You had the very violent one up front. You had the one on the side between Adin and Medexa, which was... It started off pretty aggressive, but I think Adin realised it was always going to be a little bit tough considering the archer position, so he had to pull back. Tommy went for the slow burn approach, but maybe he needed more, his entire army up there to really make an impact on Dabo over the long haul. The Warlord had to split his attention and was the last one to fully commit because of the open space. It ended up working out reasonably well for him, but perhaps the time taken was to the detriment of his fellow attackers. Right, once again, we just need one final charge, I think. Final kamikaze, just try and get as many kills as humanly possible. Hopefully not too much in the way of kiting, but it is what it is. Worthy victors though, Mordor, on this occasion, I think. A well-constructed defence, and of course they turned that defence to attack in the second half of the battle and were still able to pull off the victory. So big credit goes to them. The announcer has been very keen on reiterating that throughout the entire second half of the battle, hasn't he? And that is going to be that. So there we have it. In terms of kills, of course, it's going to be a little bit of a weird one, because when you've got orcs facing orcs, there's going to be a lot on the field, so the numbers are simply going to be higher no matter what. Interesting varying approaches as well, based on the amount that you can see of the men deployed. Hidden and Dabo going very much for numbers-heavy Mordor armies on the defence, so you're going to have a lot of units to try and mulch your way through. Isengard far more uniform in their approach, which again is probably what you would expect. So let's see what did the damage. For the victors, Mordor, Temple Guard doing reasonably, maybe not as domineering as you would expect. The Uruk Archers though, and Ardenheim Shadow Bows, the combination of Mordor having that long range advantage against Isengard here was definitely a contributing factor in their victory. Oleg high 111, other trolls I'm sure we'll see get higher kills. Temple Executioners doing reasonably well also. The catapult though, I was going to say, Medexa's catapult did very, very well, both early on and later when Isengard shifted to the defence. The bombardment continued, and then the catapult crew themselves, of course, got involved very late on. But yeah, that's exactly the sort of performance you want from your artillery as a defender. T.S. Niehoff, the first of the players to fall in this battle, but it wasn't in vain. He did... excuse me, as I choke on nothing. But yes, T.S. Niehoff, it wasn't in vain, it wasn't for nothing. He did enough damage to the Wound Raider that ultimately Isengard's victories in the middle were not enough to see the battle go their way. Again, the Troll Catapult doing very, very well. Nazgul, Temple Guard doing slightly better here, but then they were involved from an earlier point. Hidden, again, Temple Guard getting over 300 kills, so this is a little bit more like it from them. Less effective on the Troll Catapult, but then, you know, it is what it is. You can't have it all your own way, and for the most part, the artillery, even this one, 188 kills isn't terrible. But yeah, the artillery on the whole, the Isengard Ballistas did some damage, but they were nowhere near as effective as the Troll Catapults today. Uruk Infantry doing nicely, actually. Which is fairly surprising given the fact that those are the kind of units you would expect Isengard to be fairly comfortable against, but again, it is what it is. Ardenheim Shadowbows doing very well, and finally Dabo, Olag High, yeah, 320, getting involved in that front line where Tommy was going for that slow burn approach, but it meant that the Olag High could squash a lot of lesser Isengard units, and that's an impressive return from them. 582 from the Ardenheim Shadowbows, who were side-swiping the Mordor attack up there as well, so very good stuff from them. Each of the Mordor armies had to deal with a slightly different challenge posed by Isengard, and as a result, each of them had slightly different MVPs in their armies. Olag High, Troll Catapults, Temple Guard, and Olag High. So, yeah, interesting. Very interesting indeed. Big thank you to Medexa for sending this one in and for creating this map. It's always good to see new stuff. And yeah, as we move forward, there's going to be, I think, the replay, which is going to come out sort of before, like, closest to Christmas Day, essentially, is going to be a showcase of the updated version of Erebor when it's all wintry, so that's a little bit festive. Certainly a little bit more festive than the dark caverns of Gorgoroth here. And following on from that, I think there is going to be a few more showcases of set-piece maps as well, just because development is starting to enter a fairly key time. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how things transpire. I'm going to try and record as much as I can before I visit home for Christmas, because it'll be the last I'm able to do in 2023 before I return in 2024. So yeah, we'll see. We'll play it by ear until then. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this.